Welcome, everyone, to the Canadian Philosophy Show. I'm one of your many co-hosts today, Tagen Marshall, and I'm here with a few others, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Starting with Nicole Kerrigan. Why don't you go first?
Okay. Hi, my name is Nicole Kerrigan. I'm a student at Fraser University, majoring in both psychology and philosophy. And I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much.
That's great. And Mikey, or Michael Robert Caditz, you're next.
Yeah, my name is Michael. I am a alumnus of Vancouver Island University, and can't get away from philosophy.
Hale.
I'm Hale Rothery. I'm a philosophy student at Vancouver Island University in his fourth year.
Excellent. And our newest co-host for the first time ever, I'll let him introduce himself. David, go ahead.
I'm David Pham from SFU. I'm a fifth year comp sci and statistics student.
Nice. Well, we're glad to have you here, David. And it was David who actually, I think, came up with this topic tonight. So we'll be hearing a lot more from him as the show goes on. And I'm Tagen Marshall, a pleased member of Vancouver Island University, a philosophy major as well. So welcome to the show, everyone. And before we get into tonight, which is how do we measure the health of a society? I want to turn it over to Nicole so she can thank our radio stations.
Yes. So thank you to CHLY from Vancouver Island University and CJSF from Fraser University. We're very grateful for you airing our show. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our radio stations. All right, and I'll turn it over to David to introduce kind of what he wants to do with this topic.
Okay, wait, hold on a second. I'm going to call a timeout, and I'll edit this part out, but I'm seeing a report that our audio isn't coming through on YouTube, so I want to just check that, and then I can edit this part out.
Okay. For a second, I thought it was something I did. I was like,
is anyone monitoring on YouTube? Can you tell me if the audio is coming through on YouTube?
I can monitor 1 second.
Yeah, can you check that? I just don't want to. I don't want to do the whole show without the. I don't know why that would be happening, but let's see if that's actually.
I think it's just the way you would check it, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I got audio on YouTube.
Okay, you have audio on YouTube now? You have it?
Yeah.
Okay, so then whoever's. Does anyone want to? We have a couple watchers on YouTube. Can you comment if you can hear us now on YouTube? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, I guess I fixed it. I just kicked the desk out that I'm sitting at. Yeah, okay. Okay, good. Resume.
Great. So, David, why don't you begin by kind of talking about what you want to do with this topic tonight?
Right. I think if I do recall correctly, it was actually Mikey that came up with the topic, but it came about because I was suggesting maybe a topic about aliens with the recent news, and then he was suggesting, oh, I wonder if you could have a healthy society with aliens, without aliens, and then that's kind of how it came about. But I think it'd be interesting to talk about how each member feels about economic measures of a society, like economic growth. I don't think we have an economics major on the show right now, unfortunately, but we can all give our unqualified opinions. And I think it'd be really cool to see where we're heading in terms of mental health measures, education, what the measures are like with education, level of literacy in the culture, in the society, and things that I was thinking about was wealth distribution, things like how easily it is to enter politics, how much sway the elite or ultra rich have over politicians or possibly over the media. I think if you have the ability to ask the question, then the playing ground is never really fair or even. So is it really the people asking the question, or is it the ultra rich kind of feeding and giving birth to these narratives that we end up talking about? That's kind of like my off the dome smattering of ideas. If you guys would like to jump in, that'd be sweet.
Right, so I mean, there's a lot there. So is there one topic that someone wants to begin to dive in on?
I'll talk about I guess the economic measures are still statistical economic measures of society. One very well known one is GDP, gross domestic product, and that's used to see how much I guess the country is exporting in terms of like financial goods. I believe that's my lay understanding of that statistic. And I took an introductory economics class in my first semester at Douglas College, actually, and I'm no means an expert on it. And I believe that there's a lot of problems with GDP in particular, because GDP is often over relied on when looking at the overall, I guess, both I think we're talking about health of a society, but like health of a country, richness of a country, prosperity of a country. GDP is like very, very heavily relied on. And I believe that other measures like the happiness index or something like that came out as a response to measures like the GDP and on the criticism that the GDP is very narrow and doesn't and kind of looks at and reduces people and the countries to just like economic product and like money, as opposed to other things that can make a country and people what they are.
Right.
And David, go ahead.
I remember looking back at measures of GDP several months ago, just finding out what the top ranked GDPs were in the world. I think China was probably like number 1, number 2. But when you adjust GDP for an individual's buying power or the average individual's buying power, then it turns out that they're on the same level as Brazil or South American countries. So they might have the number 1 GDP in the world, but it turns out the average person isn't really that wealthy, which makes sense because if we look at just raw GDP, I think that's basically just a measure of how big your economy is. And the more people you have, the bigger it's going to be, right? So.
And I think that kind of leads in when we're talking about the health of the society, like we have to start asking questions about, like, I guess what is healthy or what parts are healthy. Like, do we measure, like, is the ultimate measure like the society in the abstract, as in like a single unit, like GDP would measure it as essentially, or is it about how each individual member is doing overall? And in a sense, is that like well-being diversified over the group? And so, there's been lots of really, really like powerful empires and nations which, like, taken on a wide scope, look like they're really great. I was actually earlier today, I was watching a documentary on the Roman Empire, which is always fun and always seems very impressive and grand. But when one starts to think about the quality of life for a very large portion of people who lived in that society, like, it was very terrible, even how do we understand what the healthy society really is in comparison to the society as a whole versus the individual's experience, right?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here and agree with what you're saying, Hale, and also with your original point, David. I definitely caught what you guys were saying about the distinction between the quote-unquote health of a country or of a society versus the actual well-being of the humans within it. And I want to say that that a measure of a healthy society is sort of pointless if we're not looking at the actual happiness and well-being and the quality of life of the individuals who make up that society. Because as you guys pointed out, as you just talked about, Hale, there are many and have been many countries and societies where the wealth is so unevenly distributed that you have the autocracy living high on the hog and in their castles with endless amounts of wealth and power, and then you have masses of people living very poor quality lives. And if you look at only the overall numbers from the country, it might look decent, but the distribution of wealth is so unequal that you could hardly say it's a healthy society. So I want to jump in with what I think is one measure of many of healthy society, and that would be literacy, but a particular kind of literacy which often gets overlooked, because oftentimes when we talk about literacy, we talk about a particular type of literacy, which is functional literacy. Can people read and write? But there's another kind of literacy which I would argue is at least as important, and we should be familiar with this as philosophy students, which is intellectual literacy. So an example of intellectual literacy would be ability to think critically. So there are many people that have functional literacy, but they don't think critically, right? They're functional in their literacy, and they can be great consumers. They can understand advertisements for retail products and go buy the product, but they're not thinking critically. They can swallow hook, line, and sinker what politicians feed them because they're functionally literate. They can read the ads, they can listen to cable news, but they're not intellectually literate because they haven't developed critical thinking skills to help them determine what is true and what is false and what stuff they should ignore. So I'm going to chime in here with my vote that intellectual literacy, which includes critical thinking ability, is one very important measure of the health of a society, which might often get overlooked when people are talking economics.
Yeah, if I get Mikey from what you're saying, it makes me think about a lot of stuff. One is, obviously with this topic, that what makes a healthy society, I ask, like, is our Western democratic society, i.e. Canada, the United States, and Western Europe, generally speaking, is that a healthy society? I don't have an answer for that, but I do have one thing, which is a derivative in some sense, which is that it's definitely a society of stuff, and it's definitely a consumer society, and it makes me think a lot about Plato in the Republic. He talks about what's the just society, what's the health. What he actually talks specifically, what is a healthy society, and the most basic example he gives is what he calls the simple society, which is other people within the context of the dialogue describe as being very base, which is where it's a society where people share and operate with each other. They share the wealth. They also share the burdens of each sort of district of necessity, but people only really do and engage in what is necessary. It's not full of all the trappings and the grandeur of and the consumables of a society that we're really familiar with. And I always found that very interesting. Later on the dialogue, Plato goes on to extrapolate on what a society more akin to ours would have to be like to be functional. But I always found that very interesting that he considers, when it comes to making the healthiest society, the simpler it is, the better, which I always thought was a very interesting observation on his point, and concerning for our own society's health, if he's correct.
I'm gonna admit right here, right now, that economics is not my strong suit, so that's why I've kind of gone silent on this aspect. But I think as much as there are people advocating that we reshape and rethink about the way we run our economic system, I think there is, as Mikey's saying this, I know this isn't quite what you're saying, Mikey, but the power of education is so key, because when you're educated, you come to realize that you as a consumer, to use the capitalist terms, you as a consumer allow for the people who are big to get big. Every time you purchase an item from Amazon, that went into Jeff Bezos' pocket. Now, there's definitely more complexities, but a way to simplify and really demonstrate the values in which you hold is the old adage, you put your money where your mouth is. So I think, but that cannot happen unless there is an understanding of how this system works, and not just an understanding that says this system is bad, but rather an understanding that says this is how the system operates. And if you truly want to see, say, more small businesses come to the forefront, there must be more investment from individuals. And this is the whole conservative notion of small government, right? It should not be up to the government to determine which businesses come to large, become, big overseeing entities, but rather it's up to the individuals, almost as a collective, but still individuals, to say we put our weight behind that. So but again, just like in politics and understanding how government works, there must be a consistent effort put in to educating people on not just the shortfalls of the system, but also just the system in general. What are your thoughts on that? And if that is it, how do we foster more of that education?
Well, Tagen, you said something that I don't want to let slip by because it's a touchy subject for me, and I have strong feelings about it. And I cannot agree at all with uh, the idea that of the capitalist premise that the marketplace will if the marketplace is left to control the private sector, then we will wind up with a better society. I just don't accept that. And there's all kinds of examples of where unfettered capitalism it leads to a worse society. And one example would be in the deep south in the United States, when independent private businesses were racist and discriminated against black people and excluded black people, thereby making society worse. I would say, making the health of the society worse. It wasn't until the government stepped in with equal rights legislation and that forced independent business owners to serve black people, to let them in the restaurants, let them in the stores. And other examples would be environmental protection. If left to unfettered capitalism, if left to the marketplace, we would have all kinds of many worse environmental problems than we already have: air pollution, water pollution, lumber companies dumping tailings into rivers, companies spewing even more pollutants into the atmosphere than they already are. It's only through governmental intervention that the capitalist marketplace is kept under control. So I'm not sure you were advocating for unfettered capitalism, but and there's certainly different degrees of how many restraints and controls there are on private businesses. But I think it's important for me to say that I believe that part of the health of a society is measured by a government which is effective enough and quote unquote large enough to put controls and constraints and regulation on what otherwise would be profit-seeking individuals and companies who have one and only one goal in mind, which is money making, not the betterment of society.
Right, okay, Mikey, I appreciate that, but that leads me to an interesting sidebar conversation of when I think of measuring the health of a society, I think of not, as we're talking about, right, not just education, not just economics, but actually the ability to have interpersonal relationships even when you disagree. The and and it's not that I completely disagree with Mikey, but I don't necessarily think that all those are necessarily entirely a result of capitalism, but that's a conversation for another day. but the ability to communicate and to have these conversations, which you may not agree, but you can still be civil about these conversations, is definitely an interesting. I think that demonstrates the health of a society in which it allows individuals who may disagree or may agree on things to come together to do what Plato does and Socrates does with his colleagues, and to sit with them to discuss and better understand and rationalize each other's positions. Would what do you think about that, David? Do you think that's a true aspect of being able to measure the health of a society, or do you disagree?
I agree wholeheartedly. I think, especially maybe it's in recent times in social media, you can, and maybe the state of journalism, you can kind of just portray your opponents in whatever light you want. But I think group cohesion or cohesion among large groups of people at the largest scale, whether it be people who disagree upon ideologies or people of different ethnicities or people from different upbringings, backgrounds, economic status. I think the degree to which people can cooperate is one of the major bottlenecks of just humanity in general. I think one of the major questions we have to ask about any system is basically, does it scale? And also, will it stay stable? I think touching on capitalism or how many, the power or maybe the reach that businesses should have, I think in America, we really see kind of the way I see it is like a triangle. You have like at one point the government, on the other people, and the third is companies or the ultra rich. It's kind of like a constant equilibrium and tension between the three groups. And I think a healthy society needs constant tension from people, government, and business, kind of pulling everyone into where they should be. I think when you have a really kind of like laissez-faire market or a capitalist, very capitalist market with no regulations, it's really easy for the businesses to kind of just become unaccountable. And if any point on the triangle becomes unaccountable, basically disaster happens. I think humans in general, when they're left to be unaccountable, are just kind of really destructive or very self-interested.
I think I think you raise. I'll respond and then open it to the group to make comments. But I think you raise an interesting point, David, about the individual person, because even people as individuals seek out direction. They seek out motivation, and I think in my study of existentialism, that's why existentialism is so popular, because not only is it, for the most part, is it that it's something that you discover yourself, but it's an ongoing process, and that existential dread we talk about. I'd be interested to get the rest of the team's opinion on this as well, is kind of that chief motivator. And so that tension you're talking about, as much as it helps people fall in line, I think it also motivates people to work to get up the ladder, to see what they can reach. Because I think the reason that some humans can be more kind of self-destructive is because humans are always seeking for motivation. Humans are always seeking for purpose. And when there is no purpose, when there is no structure, when there is no kind of focal point, right, life becomes meaningless and you fall into nihilism. So that's a problem. So I wanna get the team's response to that. What do y'all think?
I could respond
Sure,
if
please.
no one else wants to go first. Okay, I would say the existential dread, the meaning, or finding meaning, a personal meaning in life, whether it not be a maybe there is no objective or cosmic meaning, but a personal meaning. I think is something that's severely lacking currently, or is being weaponized. Maybe I feel like it. I don't know if it should be a part of the education system, but I feel like kids are kind of not they're sheltered too much in the sense that maybe I would have appreciated from a younger age if I was taught how to deal with these like really negative emotions, how to what to do when I find myself in a state where I can't see any meaning, and also not giving me a kind of answer like just get rich or like just become powerful or you know ignore everyone else, just try and accumulate as much personal influence as possible. I feel like a lot of societies or cultures that's kind of the ideal, where it's just yeah, get rich, become a doctor, I don't know, be a billionaire, own a yacht, I don't know, have a bunch of likes on Instagram, but that doesn't do anything to assuage my existential dread. That's a nice distractor, but it doesn't quite solve the underlying root of the problem. And I feel like I'm not a Buddhist. I'm no expert on Buddhism, but I feel like they do present what seems like a very promising answer, or at least a very helpful set of practices that anyone could do. And you might even be able to train that from a young age to be better at possibly feeling happy with no meaning, feeling fulfilled with no meaning.
And I guess you could also say that it is that search for meaning, that pressure, which continues the drive, right? I think that's why Viktor Frankl, when he was writing Man's Search for Meaning and discusses his experience, right, in one of the darkest moments of human history, the Holocaust, right? So many were losing hope and losing a sense of meaning because there was so much death, so much destruction. But for Viktor Frankl to come alongside and say, it is up to you to realize your potential, right? To invoke in them a journey of self-discovery, which then would lead to his quote, right? Basically stating that after all he has suffered, the one fear for the homecoming man that he has to face is his God. Right? After all he has endured, that is the final thing he must face. So yeah, so I think you're quite right that we need to find a way to reincorporate, well, by bringing philosophy back into common conversation. Not a plug for the discipline whatsoever, but I think that's important. What Let's continue. Does anyone else have any thoughts on the last couple comments? Hale, Mikey,
Before we
Nicole?
continue,
Yeah, go ahead.
Before we continue, I just want to say quickly, since it's the half mark, you're listening to the Canadian Philosophy Show. We're from students from Simon Fraser University and Vancouver Island University. Thank you for listening to us. Continue.
Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, listening, guys, what you guys are saying and bringing in questions about existential dread. Existential self-realization involves a lot of self-understanding and self-expression, and those activities, I wonder how well they fit into the structure of a healthy society. And what I mean by that is, again, I think back to Plato and the fact of he actually doesn't advocate for a whole lot of self-expression, self-realization. his view of a healthy society of the, the just kingdom or whatever is one that is quite rigorously structured. It has a strata. People have certain positions, and people have certain duties and jobs, and fulfilling those duties and jobs is the realization, not some sort of self-discovery or self-expression. And I also think, and that leads me to think a lot about societies which do, even today we talk a lot about, or there's a lot of research on like happiness indexes and stuff like that. And countries that generally rate high in happiness indexes aren't necessarily countries that are wealthy, but they are countries that are very uniform. That's personally not a plug for like my own opinion of that, but the happiest country in the world is Bhutan by most ratings, a country that is very insulated and very, very culturally and ethnically uniform, right, and very traditional in its setup. And so it makes me wonder a lot about, at what point does this sort of existential self-understanding and self-realization and exploration, how does that actually fit into, or does that even accord with the healthy society? Or is that a kind of modern, very individualistic outlook in terms of value? Yeah, that's definitely where I go. Obviously, it's something that each of us as an individual struggles with, but I'm not necessarily so sure that it's a good measurement. The realization of that is a good measurement for an actual healthy society, whatever that might be, which just still seems to elude us a little bit.
Yeah, I want to follow up with what you just said, Hale. You lead right into the point that I was thinking I wanted to make when we got into existentialism and personal meaning. And I think there's a danger in going there, and I'll tell you what the danger is. So when some of the existentialist philosophers like Sartre talked about how it's possible to find meaning in life under no matter what the constraints, under any circumstance, even if one's in prison, even if one is a prisoner in a concentration camp like Anne Frank, even if one is conscripted into the army, there's always choice, according to the existentialist philosophers. According to Sartre, there's always choice. There's always the possibility for finding meaning, and to use as an excuse one's constraints or one situation that he or she was dropped into in the world as an excuse to give up, to say, I can't find any meaning, there's no meaning in my life is terrible. According to Sartre, that would be fleeing one's freedom. That would be inauthentic, and it would be fleeing one's freedom, which is inherent in being a human being. Now, that's fine, but the danger is to reverse that. The danger is to then say, well, therefore, there's nothing wrong with concentration camps, there's nothing wrong with prisons, there's nothing wrong with societies which repress and oppress people, because sure, they can find meaning anyway. That's not the intent of Sartre. That's not the intent of existentialism. The intent is not to justify oppressive societies. It's not to justify constraining people. It's not to justify concentration camps. It doesn't work in reverse. So I think we have to be careful about that. If we're talking about a better society, we need to be talking about a just society. We need to be talking about people having freedom and having the ability to follow their dreams. And I don't know that we need to accept Plato's premise that democracy is flawed. As Plato said in the Republic, democracy may be pretty. It may be, we may have a embroidery of many colors, but it's not a good way to live. And I don't know that I accept Plato's claim about that. So I think if we're talking about a better society, we really have to be looking at the quality of the society and not cop out by saying, well, no matter how bad the society is, people can always find meaning.
Yeah, I think that's good. What do you think, David?
I think I agree absolutely with what Mikey said, and to an extent what Hale said. I think that there is more to life than just meaning or finding a meaning. Even after you found it, you have to live it, right? And of course, you don't want to just say, well, people can be happy in anywhere. We'll just do whatever we want to them. That's kind of, I feel like that is a sign of an unhealthy society, because that doesn't really scale. If that continues, and I mean, probably going to be a revolution or some kind of riots happening, and there's going to be mass or a lot of violence in the future, like next 20 years, right? I think about what Hale said about Bhutan being a very happy country, but also very insular ethnically and culturally. I do think that as humans grow, as humans come to know more about the world and also their fellow people, there does need to be a protocol, a healthy protocol about how different cultures or societies will interact. Like what we said about the disagreement, or also how to integrate new cultures, new ethnicities with contradictory values into one system. I think perhaps that's why I advocate for the finding meaning, or a greater meaning. To me, is possibly identifying with more than myself. Finding a identity across all of humanity, seeing in all humans the worst, the best, the average. Basically, I could have been that. And also a deep understanding of what people in the history have experienced. Because I feel like when we talk about intellectual literacy, understanding history and what has happened, what people are capable of when they become unaccountable, or when there are revolutions, or when there are power vacuums, or when one group has too much power, it becomes quickly pretty violent. I feel like that development of a global human identity across cultures, across even sense of self, would be maybe something critical for a healthy society.
David, you just raised a really interesting point. I'm going to expand on. I'm going to run with something you said. You talked about global, and when you said that, I realized that we are accepting a premise in our topic, which is that health is measured by society. Why don't we look at the world? Why are we dividing people by quote unquote societies or countries, rather than simply considering the health of the world? So I think I just wanted to raise that point, because oftentimes in our questions or our topics there's implicit premises which are actually worth examining. So do we really want to be satisfied? Do we want to leave it at, oh, that country's in pretty good shape and the other country's in decent shape, or do we want to really look at people as citizens of the world and measure the happiness of the world and the well-being of the entire world, and not leave any country or ethnic group or society behind?
I think that brings us on to, I guess, the point we didn't talk about, which was sustainable growth and sustainability, ecological health, biodiversity, maintaining our ecosystems, our climates, making sure the ozone layer doesn't have a huge hole in it, and making sure that our rapid growth and development of technology won't end up destroying everything in the end. I think it's kind of alarming that within basically figuring out how to split atoms, nuclear fusion or nuclear fission, instantaneously that was just kind of directed towards, oh, how do we make a bomb with this? How do we blow other people up with this? And within 1 10 years of a technology coming out, it posed an existential threat. And I think as we become more advanced, that threat grows ever larger. We haven't blown ourselves up yet, but I think of it as like a tension. The tension is growing, and the more advanced we become, the more we're unable to cooperate peacefully or use violence, then the greater that chance becomes where someone will just use one of these weapons of mass destruction on the other.
It makes me, you're bringing up questions about sustainable growth makes me think about a lot of different stuff. But there's been the past couple centuries, particularly the last 100 years, has seen an incredible level of change and advancement in societies as a whole. But earlier we were essentially talking about the potential of cosmopolitanism, and I think there's a great danger in both with questions of growth and cosmopolitanism. I think a lot of people accept that the cosmopolitanism, which is based like another way of saying globalization of communities and personal identity in the world, we are the world, one community type things, the kind of end state. There's a great danger in the fact that the systems that most countries are currently, essentially all countries on some level or another are converting to, is still a deeply capital-driven system, and that it's very difficult for such a system to account for sustainable growth. It doesn't measure its health in that kind of way, and it doesn't even account for it, or it really has language to talk about it. And so, as more of the world turns more in that direction of the accumulation of capitalism, one slice or another, these impending existential threats become more and more acute. And so it's definitely a concern, and it's a concern with, I think, with the way the cosmopolitan outlook is going. I mean, we use the example of Bhutan is used sometimes because well-being of a society is measured in happiness, but not necessarily on economic terms. Bhutan is a very, very small country, and it's no economic powerhouse by any stretch of the imagination. I think in recent years it's been growing more, but it's stayed relatively stable in its economic growth for a long time. And yet we tend to think about and view and talk about the well-being of particularly third world countries in terms of capital accumulation, in terms of economic growth. And while there's a lot of good that comes from that, that's obvious, like it would be insane to talk otherwise. Longer term, as that system becomes more uniform, there are other concerns that are wider and more threatening to everyone on a more, well, it's on a more global scale. Yeah, that's where my mind initially goes. Let's see what other people think.
So David, one of the things I was thinking when you suggested this topic initially, or you and Michael both talked about initially, the articles that you sent us to read actually were almost all on sustainability, and I was looking at them in the context of the topic, the name of this topic: how do you measure the health of a society? So I was wondering, does David think that sustainability is, in terms of environmental, social, and economic domains, is the best way to measure the health of a society? And then now, having more context, I don't think that's necessarily the point you're trying to make exactly, but it makes me wonder to what extent, and this is related to what Hale said, to what extent can sustainability be used to measure the health of a society? And of course, I don't think it can only be sustainability, but there definitely should be some sort of projections done with statistics as well to measure what can happen in the future with the health of a society, as opposed to just like what's happening right now, here and then. And I think that's where sustainability can come in to really be an integral part of the equation and prediction there.
yeah, I think like what Hale is saying, what you're saying is that seeing, I guess, capital gains or economic growth really kind of like focusing in on that has led to basically the US's complete mismanagement of the coronavirus. You see India, China being the most populated countries in the world, yet, in the news lately, India has been, we've heard about a lot of outbreaks in India and things getting worse, but I mean, the total number of cases is still greater in the US than in India. That's something that is actually mind blowing. And how leaders of the US, leaders of the UK said they want to go for herd immunity. The leaders in these systems are not thinking long term in any sense. They're thinking purely personal gain, short term, quarterly profits. I think, as we were saying, with the advancement of technology, I think that as technology grows, it gets better, quarterly profits and focusing on it just becomes more and more destructive. We really need to investigate and make sure that the system will last for 100 years, for 1,000 years, for 100,000 years. And I think that's totally possible too. It's just that the greed of the very influential is kind of holding us back.
Yeah.
But also the greed in all of
Sorry.
us, I guess. Sorry. The greed that we all can have is holding us back when we don't identify with this kind of sense of global identity, perhaps.
Yeah, great point, David. So I want to, touch on that point you made about how, our world leaders don't have the future, in their mind when they're making decisions right now, especially in a global pandemic. And I think, of course, there are some considerations of long-term health and, economic sustainability, all those things. Of course, there are more, and I would say even not thinking about the pandemic right now in particular, but even before the pandemic, there's always more of a focus on the here and now. And I think, and this is something I've thought about quite a bit, but I think, and I'm not sure if there is a better solution to this, the political systems we have right now in the world, and many places. But since many politicians and people of, in powerful positions are elected on a fixed term, right, or a maximum term, and this is a term where they have power and that they need to show that that their party is the best party, and to get their party reelected and to get donations for their party, whatever, right? They have, as a politician, the politician doesn't only have a responsibility to the country and the citizens, but also to the party if they are associated with a party. So if they're only elected for a short term, if they're diverting their funds to 10 years after their term, 20 years after a term, 50 years after their term, how can those benefits be attributed to their reign at that time, their reign of power at that particular time, right? How will the credit actually go to them? There's too many variables, at least at this point, to be able to say, clearly, and it depends on what exactly we're measuring, but let's say that, Justin Trudeau puts, for example, he puts, I don't know, $1 billion into the health, into the research for some sort of cancer prevention, whatever, right? And the results only come 75 years later. But then a lot of other people gave donations, to that kind of research. How can you actually attribute, the breakthrough in that kind of research back to the person who donated at that particular time? And I think that there's an issue there, because politicians don't only have, for the large part, a responsibility to the citizens, but also to the party that they're representing, and they want to show a good face for their party. And I think that can be an issue and a conflict of interest when we're thinking about long-term sustainability and the best interests of the country and citizens as a whole. long term, not just the here and now in the present.
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely brilliant point you make.
If I can jump in here, Nicole, because you brought up a good topic, politics. Take some political studies courses for anyone who's interested. But I just took a course, and this is interesting because we see within our political system, right? We've seen just what, Nicole, you've described, this precedent for members of parliament who are supposed to be their constituents' representatives um, go along the party line. This is what we refer to in politics as tight party discipline. The concept that, the caucus will meet behind closed doors and, debate things, but at the end of the day you come out as one unified body. And this is something former MP Brett Rathgaber talks about in his book Irresponsible Government, because he basically presents the idea that this tight party discipline, along with the fact that party leaders sign nomination papers for candidates to run, does not allow those representatives to accurately and freely express the views of their constituents. And it's an interesting concept because I was thinking about a few things. I have so many questions. I was doing some looking as you guys were discussing. One of my questions is, in the brief time we have left, like 6 minutes, David and Nicole, I want to hear both your takes on this. Right? We talked about, the society of the simple and how great that sounds, and kind of the issues with capitalism and power, perhaps. But the issue is, what about Nietzsche when he describes the will to power that exists in every human being? That's an issue for me, because how are you going to get rid of that to make a better society? You can't. I don't think.
My reply would be, I don't think I agree with you. I don't think you can, and I don't think you necessarily should, because it's a good motivator if put towards the right goals, if incentivized in the right way. It's a really good drive forward.
How do you incentivize that?
I think I have a quick answer that.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead, Nicole.
I think Nicole's internet is 20 seconds behind.
Okay. So, in the meantime, let me open that to the group and just see what's your response. Mikey, I'd be interested to hear your response.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm preoccupied with. It's related, but I was thinking about cosmopolitanism and globalization. Because Hale, go ahead, Nicole.
I think that's Nicole's internet catch.
Yeah, she's kind of dropping in and out, but go ahead, Nicole. Okay, yeah, we can't hear you, Nicole. While you're getting it together there, Nicole, I want to disagree.
I'm going to talk like 30 seconds.
Oh, okay.
But before we move on, I would like to say that I think you incentivize this will to power by what I was saying before, is that equilibrium, keeping all the three groups in check: the government, the rich or the wealthy, the companies, and the people. They all have to pull on each other just the right way. And I think with this issue, I think it really needs to be the people kind of like charging forward and making sure things happen. And that really only happens when when the people are aware of the level of threat that's present, and also are aware of how best to change the system currently. I think people are hopeless.
And David, there's another element. Now we're getting into something we actually have talked about on this show, which is democracy, liberal democracy theory, and particularly John Rawls as one of the theorists who talked about one of the necessary ingredients of a democratic society, of a liberal society, is that the leaders are held accountable for rational explanations for their decisions, and there's transparency. So this is how it ties into what you just said, David. The people are not in a position to be able to empower themselves to take action if they're not informed, and they're not aware of the reasons that their governments are making the decisions they're making, or even if they're not even aware of the decisions that are being made. So so I'm going to chime in here before we're done. I want to chime in for another measure what I believe is necessary for a healthy society, which is a liberal democratic structure of government and functioning democracy, not just in theory. I mean, we have the Democratic Republic of North Korea, right? But I'm talking about in practice, we need to have leaders that are accountable and rational and transparent in their decisions, and that I believe will help lead to what you just talked about, David, which is the empowerment of people to go in a direction and make progress and move the society in the way that betters their lives.
Right. And that does filter back into what Nicole was saying, which is maybe they're not incentivized to. Maybe they're incentivized to make things as worse as possible so they can blame it on the next person who comes into to power.
Oh.
Which is a conundrum. I don't know.
Interesting. So, that has been the Canadian Philosophy Show. I'll give David the last word before I close this out.
Before David gets the last word, I want to see if Nicole is back, because I know she had something important to say, and we do have another couple of minutes. So, are you back, Nicole?
Am I back?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you're back.
Oh, great. I don't exactly remember what I wanted to say back then, so you guys can
it was about the will to power.
I wanted to say that this is one of the most interesting. Oh, the will to power. Okay. Yeah, I think I was going to say that in terms of the will to power, there's something that was at odds with the will to power. Tagen, can you remind me of the question?
The will to power basically means that it's the person's betterment despite possibly the good of the society. So how do you direct that to the common good, right? Because a just society, a society which benefits everyone, is the pursuit of the good. Now, how do you direct that very self-empowering, self-directed energy to advance to these more globalist, to these more overarching societal goods?
Well, I would say that there is an easy and a hard answer here. It's both easy and hard, because I think it's possible that you could make the person's, interests for power, right, to be within the same interest as the good of the society of the whole. Although it might be through a different process, the society might want something and a person who wants to be in power might want something. There's a possibility that those two things, even though the process is different, could overlap outcome-wise, right? So, and I had a good example in mind, but I'll try to come up with one now. So, let's say that there's a upcoming leader. I would say Philip, whatever, right? Philip is the upcoming leader, and he has a will of power. He wants to be in power, and he has that drive, right? Let's say that he sees a hole in society, and a kind of a niche that he can fill through, for example, the society is asking for more water right? Or like clean water supplies, right? And he could get elected into power by giving those clean water supplies, and then it eventually ends up helping the society as a whole. So even though, the society wants something that's, that is a benefit to them, and the guy wants to have power, at the end, it ultimately does come to the same outcome. But I can't really say how, I don't think there's a way to micromanage how those two things would overlap. So I don't have that kind of answer. But I do think in theory it is possible for those two things to overlap, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks.
Exactly.
Thanks, Nicole. Now we really are about out of time.
All right.
David, did you want to get your 10, 20 second closing? I stole
Yeah,
it from
sure.
you before. Yeah.
It was really fun being on this podcast. It was great talking with you guys. And I'm glad to have been on.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, David. This has been the Canadian Philosophy Show with Nicole Kerrigan, Hale Rothery, David, and Mikey, and myself. And I'll leave you with this question. Was Spock right when he said, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one? Good night, everyone.
Okay, so great. I ended the Zencaster. I'm going to leave the YouTube live for another couple of minutes just for some informal talk, because at least one of the comments on YouTube says, could you please keep it open for a couple more minutes? So that was the end of the official show, but I'll leave the stream going in case anyone wants to ask any more questions or make any comments on YouTube, or if any of you guys want to say anything more.
Oh, sure.
Any of us want to say anything more, but it won't be part of the record, but at least, or actually it will be. It'll be well, whatever we do say now will still be on the saved YouTube podcast. So yeah.
I was gonna say, I guess I ran out of time on the Zencaster, but I was gonna say, I totally agree with Nicole, and I think it's possible. I think a lot of situations, the optimal strategy is cooperation, especially if you're talking about, say, long-term planning or even short-term planning. Let's say the long-term case, if I become a dictator and I misuse my power so grossly that in, let's say, 10, 20 years, the people overthrow me. Let's say I'm 24. I'll die when I'm, 40, right? But if I use my powers for good, if I try and unite everyone towards the common good, the common good, I feel like we were saying, the technology in 20 years, if I'm planning ahead, if I'm doing everything right, I would be in a better position to utilize what will come in 20 years. And what will come in 20 years will be absolutely world-changing, probably, because it always is. But I guess that's my reply.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I thought it was a really good show. I thought there was a lot of good discussion. I appreciate you, David, joining our team. Sorry, I forgot your last name on the outro there. My apologies.
No problem.
No problem. I'm Mikey, so hey,
Yeah.
So one comment says, I wish you could do this show 3 times a week covering politics. Okay. And then another comment, will David appear on future broadcasts? Well, David, you can answer that. You're welcome to. Do you want to? Can you tolerate another few of these?
I think I'd be happy to come on for a few more.
Fantabulous.
Mikey, I'm interested to hear what you were going to say something, and then you got cut off during the show.
Oh, sorry, who?
Hale was
Mike.
that? Oh, what?
Me?
Hale,
Yeah.
who are you talking to?
Oh, yeah.
Talking to Mikey. Yeah.
Are you talking about when I started talking about globalization and cosmopolitanism? And then we kind of got jumbled into some internet problems, but
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's actually a really complex topic. This could be a whole nother show, actually. But briefly, I was going to make the claim that cosmopolitanism and globalization are not the same things. And I was going to express that the anti-cosmopolitanism, anti-globalization duo, kind of putting those together, is actually a narrative that's being used by far-right extremists these days, who are anti-immigration. They're often racist, and it's a narrative, but they're actually different things. And there's some interesting there's an article, I'll put it in the chat for you guys, that discusses that matter. So, like really quickly, cosmopolitanism entails things that I would think many of us would think are positive, like understanding tolerance of other ethnic groups, as opposed to the opposite of cosmopolitanism, which is like provincialism. Remember we read Thornton Wilder's Our Town, and we talked about kind of the small-minded, myopic world that the residents
David, you and I talked about that the other day.
Yeah, the residents of that little town, what's it called, live in. That's
Grover's
Corners. That's the opposite of cosmopolitanism. That's like myopic, small town, not even provincialism, village thinking. And so I just wanted to register my protest to any attempt to lump together globalization with cosmopolitanism, because. But anyway, let's do a show on that. I think we could do a show on that another time.
Yeah, it'd be good, because I think yeah, it definitely can be like those criticisms, like especially cosmopolitanism, can and have been used by like far right people, often out like for their own purposes. But it's also like criticisms are levied pretty heavy on like left wing philosophical circles as well, more in relationship to cosmopolitanism and capitalism and the relationship that they do share. And how there's like a specific cultural destruction and recreation within the context of capitalist systems into is like kind of pseudo monoculture that is not specifically like culturally like the values of how a particular culture expresses itself, but in terms of it being structurally capitalist and aggressively capitalist, right? And it's interesting, like if you I've traveled quite a bit, and you go to countries that are considerably like culturally different, and then you see a bunch of like people dressed in Calvin Klein business suits running around, right, directing everything. And so it's kind of it's an interesting phenomena that it certainly like warrants more discussion. And
let's do a show on it, Hale. Yeah, I'm gonna schedule a show for it, and I just put an article, which I think it's from Harvard Business Review, which is a really good article, which talks about this. But just be careful about the anti-cosmopolitanism narrative, because Hitler and the Nazis were leading anti-intellectuals, right? They were anti-intellectual, and there's
but I think the argument that you're making is faulty, because it's equating just because certain people of like nefarious beliefs and outcomes believe a certain thing doesn't necessarily make it untrue, right? Okay. They might have had their own like various motivations for it and misuse those things of belief, but it's
okay. Well, at least can we agree on this? Whether we agree on the merits of or the principles or the ethics or whatever of cosmopolitanism, can we at least agree that cosmopolitanism and globalization are not synonymous? They're two different phenomena.
They're often, I would say this, they're not synonymous, but they often accompany one another. And so, that becomes a sticky issue.
Okay, all right. Let's talk
David,
about it on our show.
So dark, man.
Where did Nicole?
Sorry.
You're like trying to go Bruce Wayne on us.
I'm gonna turn my light on.
Okay, so is there any questions from our viewers, or can we?
I'll just somebody liked my blue vest, and somebody said Hale has a good point, and everybody likes David. I'm just reading the YouTube. David, I guess all your friends are here.
My friend.
Nicole, people like your energy, good energy. You
have good energy.
The ID halfway through, which it's gonna do, but good for you. People like that energy. Yeah, I thought it was a good show. The second the YouTube goes off, I have some business.
Oh, then you can say the private stuff. Okay, I'll end the YouTube stream. Thanks all YouTube viewers for
Yeah.
watching. So
Yeah,
we do
thank
this,
you, everyone.
just to let you know, we do at least one show a week, sometimes 2 shows a week. Our regular show is Tuesdays at 7:30, and this was actually an extra one. So stay tuned. We have a Facebook page. Are we going to be posting our schedule in advance on that Facebook page pretty soon?
Yeah.
The Canadian Philosophy Show.
I'll do that.
Yeah, or you can watch our right here on
And
our
it's
YouTube channel.
we're doing it 7:30 p.m. PST, Pacific Standard Time. So
Pacific
West
Daylight
Coast
Time. Pacific
You're in a
Daylight
different
Time.
time zone.
Pacific Daylight Time.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to end the YouTube stream. Bye, YouTubers. Okay, let's
Bye.